St. Elizabeth and Seton, and your hosts are Elena and this is Evan. I'm a college student studying entrepreneurship. I was born Catholic. Me and Evan are both really into theology, so we'll be talking all about saints and history and philosophy together on this channel. So, Evan, you want to talk a little bit more?
Yeah, we both love church history and theology. I was raised Assemblies of God / non-denominational, but I'm getting confirmed Catholic around September or so. But I'm baptized under Assemblies of God, so we have a little bit different situations, but we're still gonna have the same faith.
St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. She's the first canonized American saint. She got married young and she had 5 kids. A great mother. She's also an entrepreneur. She opened various schools for poor children, specifically orphaned girls. And she also founded the Sisters of Charity, which was a group of women from all around the world who lived together, prayed together, and supported the poor, especially children from around the world.
St. Elizabeth Ann Seton grew up Episcopal, raised her kids Episcopal, and her husband was Episcopal. The Episcopal Church is like kind of, it falls under the Anglican umbrella, but it's the American version basically.
It's important to note that St. Elizabeth Ann Seton is also the patron saint of widows and Catholic schools because she's actually the founder of the first Catholic school in America. Getting into her early life, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton was born into a wealthy Episcopalian family in New York City in 1774 in August. She was raised by her father mainly because her mother actually passed away when she was 3 years old. So early in her life, she was faced with a huge loss, which was her mother. This made her look up to her father a lot more. He taught her a whole bunch of skills throughout her life growing up. She was really close with her dad. Later on in her early life, you could say, she was 19 years old when she got married. Her husband, William McGee Seton, got married on January 25th of 1794. They built a beautiful family of 5 kids. She was raising her family in New York City with her husband and a full house of a bunch of kids. So it seemed like she had the dream life. Everything was going great. She was really close with her family. And then suddenly her husband's business wasn't doing so well because of an economic crash at the time. So they started struggling at that point. On top of that, her husband was actually diagnosed with tuberculosis. Back then, this was a death sentence. And what they ended up doing was her husband, and her oldest daughter, Anna, decided to take a ferry to Italy. So she left the rest of her kids behind because the warm climate was their last hope that he would get better and that the warm climate would help his symptoms. So they make it to Italy and they lived with the Felici family, which were business partners of her husband. At the time, there was a sickness spreading in Italy, so they actually had to quarantine and they were not getting the best treatment. So this ended up worsening his condition and he ended up passing away.
So when they went to Pisa, Italy, they stayed with the Felici family, which was a Catholic family, and they were really close business partners and family friends. After William McGee's death, they got really close and they were hospitable to Elizabeth. Eventually, they got into discussions about doctrine and church history and stuff. She's kind of like shrugging it off or, laughing about it like, oh, they're trying to convert me. But when she actually looked into it, you see this in her letters that she wrote to like different bishops and reverends. So a day after her husband passed away, she writes this letter to Rebecca, her sister. House appointed in the Protestant burying ground. So William McGee was buried in the Episcopal cemetery. Close his eyes, lay him out ride a journey, be obliged to see a dozen people in my room till night, and at night crowded with the whole sense of my situation. O my Father and my God. So in this deep state of sorrow, she calls out to God. This is your only hope in a situation like this. We don't understand it completely because that stuff hasn't happened to us and hopefully it never will, but we've been through stuff before where the only hope at that point is to call on God. So that's exactly what she does, and that's a day after he dies. 6 months later, she thinks she's healing from this grief because she knows God is the father of the fatherless. Now her kids don't have an earthly father, but she trusts that God will be their father. So, yeah, and then in July, 7 months after her husband's death, July 26, 1804, she writes to Bishop John Carroll. So she's starting to look into the Catholic doctrine and the church history and theology and stuff like that. After what the Felici family had taught her, she's telling Bishop John Carroll, who was the bishop in New York, she's saying, I'll actually read the direct writing because it's so relatable. She says, the Protestant Episcopal Church was founded only on the principles and passions of Luther, and consequently that it was separated from the church founded by our Lord and his apostles. So, kind of similar situation to me in a way, because in my Protestant church, we never learned about church history or anything, and we weren't catechized. We kind of just went with the flow, and you go to church on Sunday and hear a sermon and sing songs and stuff, but you never really learn about why you believe what you believe. And so when she figures this out and she looks at the Reformation and how it went down, honestly, that's the biggest giveaway. Look at the Reformation and how it went. Yeah, so she then later on wrote to a Protestant reverend and says hey, I've been looking into church history and these different books I've been recommended, and then she's reminding him how he would suggest certain chapters of John to read but not others, and she's like, oh, now I see why. And then she writes to Rebecca again, and she, during her conversion, she's like, what a joy it would be to have the same view of the Eucharist as Catholics. They believe that they truly possess God in the sacrament. She's like, what a blessing it'd be to believe such a thing. And then she figures out that's the historical belief. That's the belief that Christians have had since the beginning. The Eucharist is one of the main reasons for her conversion. Similar to me.
Yeah, after almost a year, she officially converted to Roman Catholicism on March 14th, 1805. And she actually chose Mary as her confirmation saint, by the way. I did not know that.
Which Mary?
The Mother of
Our
God.
mom.
Special guest. I'm going to do a tour.
Hi, Mom.
Tour coming up. Getting back into it. So we ended off with her interest in the Catholic faith and the Felici family introducing her to the Catholic Church. She was conflicted at first, but after a year, she converted to Catholicism, and the date specifically is March 14th of 1805, and she chooses Mary as her confirmation saint. But converting to Catholicism is no easy thing. She was faced with immediate rejection. Her family cut her off. They stopped helping her with the kids and helping her financially. So now she was a widow with barely any source of income and 5 kids to feed. And more than just family, all of her connections. She used to be a very high social class, as we talked about earlier. She was born into a wealthy family, and everything seemed to be set for her, but now this change of events has completely turned around her life, which seems to be for the worst, but it actually isn't, and we'll get into that now. So this led to years of financial struggle and social discrimination by pretty much all of New York City, because at the time Catholics were a small minority that were usually very criticized, and it wasn't a huge flex to be Catholic back then. So she was really brave to do that. And then later, she ended up opening a boarding house for boys. And this was her very first school, actually. But it ended up closing down because the teachers and the parents of the children found out she was Catholic and put her out of business. So that just shows you how much her and her family were discriminated against in this time. So, after this rough part of her life, her and her family decided to pick up and move to Maryland. She was actually invited by a group of priests who wanted her to open a school. So that's what she ends up doing, and she needed other people to help her. So, Catholic women from all around the world came around and they formed a convent. And this group of women opened a school for low income girls. And this became the first Catholic school in America because of St. Elizabeth. This group of women was officially named the Sisters of Charity, and she was the founder of that and was named the first superior. She would serve this role for the next 12 years of her life. So, for some context, in these 12 years, these women would live together and pray together and serve the poor, giving up all of their self needs and what they wanted to serve others. And I think that was really important and notable and really showed for her character. She cared for all five of her kids and also ran this school at the same exact time. So she was definitely very determined and she cared a lot and she was very deep into her faith and she faced a lot of loss in her life, including her mother and now her husband, but she used this and she turned her life around to do something so great like open up a school for little girls. All of that was because she trusted in God's plan. And I think that's something that we should all keep in our mind is that God has a plan for all of us, just like he did for St. Elizabeth and Seton.
Yeah, and Sisters of Charity is still around today, right?
Yeah, they are. The Sisters of Charity is actually a group of women that's still present and serving the community today as well. And I also wanted to add that the school that they started was St. Joseph's Academy. And this is a school that they taught little girls in Maryland. After years of running this school and running the Sisters of Charity, two of her daughters ended up passing away from tuberculosis. And this is when the same disease took over her health as well. So she ended up passing away January 4th of 1821 at 46. But although she passed away at a young age, the legacy she created still goes on with the Sisters of Charity, and her life is still remembered to this day. And I'm glad we're talking about her life because she had a crazy life that I think, whether you're Catholic or Protestant or just an atheist, yeah, these people are people that you can look up to and give you hope that your life also can turn around for the better, just like hers did. After her passing, she was later canonized and officially made a saint by Pope Paul VI on September 14th, 1975. This is when she was declared the first native born saint of the United States, which makes her the most American saint, and she was a patriot
A patriot of
for sure.
heaven.
She's so tough.
There were miracles involving Elizabeth Ann Seton 100 plus years after she had already died. The first one was the healing of Sister Gertrude Korsendorfer in 1952. It was a sister who had terminal leukemia. So, if you have terminal
Yeah,
leukemia still these days, like, you're cooked. But her community prayed a prayer with the intercession of Elizabeth Ann Seton, and unexpectedly, Gertrude was healed and relieved of her terminal leukemia. The second one that's recognized by the church is the healing of Anne Teresa O'Neill, which is a young child who also had severe leukemia. Again, the same thing. She had family members that prayed with Elizabeth Ann Seton, And this is in 1963. She unexpectedly was healed. So the church recognized these as official miracles. And so later on in 1975, she was officially a canonized saint. Takeaways I have from the Saint of the Week, Elizabeth Ann Seton, and things that I want to apply in my life is her faith and determination, how she went through a financial crisis, the loss of her husband, the backlash of her conversion. She kept going, and then the death of her child, and she fought till the very end, and eventually tuberculosis just became something that affected their whole family. But her determination and her perseverance is something I really admire, and it shows how, you know, like, I never heard of this saint until last week, but this just shows how you can find any saint that's canonized and like really find something to admire about their life and their dedication.
My takeaway was I just thought about how her life is an incredible story of how you could turn chaos and turn it around into serving others. I think the most admirable thing that I found about her was her selflessness. She gave it all up when she came back to New York, and she faced scrutiny and abandonment from her family, but she knew that pursuing the truth was more important than anything else. And that's something that I always think about is her bravery and how I want to be the same exact way and not be scared of showing and telling people about my faith. None of her life did she ever dedicate to herself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, she never cared about just like what a normal person would. I feel like we're all selfish in a way, and sometimes like we have selfish motives to do things. So, but she did none of that. She gave up her needs to start a school, gather a group of women, and help children and raise her own at the same time. That takes a lot of selflessness. Yeah, she has an incredible story that I really look up to, and it just shows that anything is possible through God and having faith. It's so crazy, the miracle. Well, there was multiple, but the one that stood out was the little girl. She had a death sentence, which was leukemia, that we still deal with today. One of the Sisters of Charity, a group of them, prayed over this little girl, and they actually had a relic of Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton. We can talk about relics too, but she placed that over the little girl's chest, and they just prayed for her intercession. And I want to make that clear that they weren't praying to Saint Elizabeth, not in that way.
Not praying to her, but praying through her or with her in a way, and not asking for Saint Elizabeth's power, but for her to pray with them for God's power. Yeah, we have to make that
Yes,
like
I want to
distinction.
emphasize that for sure, is that these women were not praying for the power of Saint Elizabeth.
Philippians 3:17-20, Paul, he's talking about how the Christians in the church should be looking up to spiritual leaders that are setting a good example like him and follow after their lives so they can not only believe in Christ but show that they're one with Christ with their actions, because your actions are powerful. And the saints kind of prove that. Like, we can look at saints' lives and really gain something from it and apply it to our lives, looking at their perseverance and their determination. Not that they were perfect, they weren't perfect. None of the saints were perfect, but they still strived to be, just like Christ was. And that's the important part, is like, I failed, but I'm not going to give up. And that's exactly where the perseverance comes in. So something truly admirable from Elizabeth Ann Seton. And we can close it out.
I think we should all continue talking about these saints' lives. So we'll be doing that every week.
Yeah. Couple things. First off, next saint of the week, it's going to be Saint Basil the Great. We'll be back at it again, talking about one of the great church fathers. And also give us more ideas in the comments, if anybody comments. Thank you to everyone for watching. God bless you.